Dear friends, our subject today is light and darkness. This is an important theme in the nature meditations. We've been meditating on light. We investigated the spiritual nature of the sun. Before long, we'll turn to the moon. But now we are going to explore the space between day and night, between the revealed and the hidden, the encounter between light and darkness. What do light and darkness mean? If I say the word light, what does it conjure up? If I say the word darkness, what does it conjure up? There are perhaps several meanings associated with these phenomena. Among them, good and evil, existence and non-existence, the apparent and the hidden, and polarity in general. We could explore each of these meanings. Let's consider first the interpretation of light and darkness as good and evil. This is a familiar way of contemplating light and darkness. In Star Wars, there is a dark side to the Force, as well as the side of light. And the dark side is the way of the villains. The theology of Zoroastrianism posits a perpetual conflict between Ormazd, representing supernal light, and Ahriman, the personification of darkness. And surrounding Ahura Mazda are seven archangels of light, and around Ahriman are seven archfiends. And the whole of history is a contest between good and evil, between light and darkness. Now, this vision of the world certainly resonates with many of our experiences, and moreover, it does accentuate the moral choices that we face. We're reminded that each moment is an opportunity to choose. What do we stand for? Do we stand for the good? Are we willing to serve it, to sacrifice for it? Or do we succumb to evil and play it out in our lives? This is a question. So the vision of the universe as a battleground between good and evil opens up a space of internal reflection within ourselves, urging us to choose good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. However, we may ask, does evil objectively exist? Is it a thing? Are good and evil completely separate? Each of them a separate substance? Is the matter as simple as that? When we reflect, we recognize that hardly anyone considers themselves evil. No one points to themselves and thinks of evil, but when one thinks of evil, one tends to think of someone else, someone on the other side of this, someone different from me, someone who is opposite to me, opposing me. That one is evil. And on both sides of a given conflict, that is the common perception. The other is the evildoer. So it raises the question, is evil something objective or is it something subjective? Now you might say, yes, it is to some extent subjective, and yet at the same time, there are acts that would be recognized universally as heinous, as harmful, as destructive. Aren't these acts evil? But then you would have to consider who performs these acts, why they perform these acts, what is the state of that psyche, the psyche of the evildoer. Is that person well? And if that mind is not well, what is the source of the unwellness? One finds cycles of harm perpetuated down through history, in which those who have been harmed and who become fearful and reactive are prone to acting out their own wounding. Are they evil? Or is the wounded, fragmented, lost psyche susceptible to actions lacking empathy? Perhaps evil is a failure of the moral imagination, the inability of a mind or heart to enter into the experience of someone else. Because if one were able to do so, could one inflict harm? If one could really know the state of someone else from the inside, if one could really know what it would mean. So there's a failure of the moral imagination, a boundedness, an egoic boundedness. Whereas the ability to empathize, to see other perspectives, to share in the experiences of others, opens us up to a way of life, a way of being that shuns the causing of harm, that hesitates to cause the least discomfiture. Knowing that if not simply by virtue of our own empathy and by virtue of our sense of a conscientious pang that comes with having hurt another, that there will, one way or another, there will be a reckoning, that the pain that I cause you will ultimately become my own pain. what is evil then but the ignorance of this, and goodness is wholeness and spiritual knowing. With regard to the association of light with goodness and darkness with evil, there's another problem. And that is that it follows in some minds that melanin in the skin is associated somehow with badness, which is a ludicrous and pernicious supposition. So there's reason to hesitate in positing an equivalence between light and goodness, darkness and evil, especially when this is in any way literalized. We could consider then the equation of light with existence and darkness with non-existence. This is a familiar philosophical position. You find it, for instance, in the Ishraqi teachings of Sheikh al-Ishraq, Shahabuddin Yahya Sohrawardi, whose whole ontology, whose whole philosophy of being is articulated through a cosmology of light. Light is being. And light is self-apparent. Being is simply what is knowable, what shows itself. It shows itself. It is as it shows itself. Light is being, lighting up the world, lighting up all things. The divine being, the Wajib al-Wujud, is the light of lights, the Nur al-Anwar. And from the light of lights come wave upon wave of emanations of light, and thus the whole universe comes into being. From this perspective, what is darkness? Darkness is simply the background of nothingness against which light reveals itself. Darkness is simply the absence of light. It's not a substance in itself. It has no being of its own. Being is light, but luminous being reveals itself against the background of non-being or darkness. So this is the philosophy of illumination, which takes its cue from the light verse of the Quran Sharif. God is the light of the heavens and the earth. Allah nur samawati wal ard. So it's very easy to understand light as symbolic of, or expressive of, illustrative of being itself, and to understand the divine being as the very light of lights. Darkness is not something that opposes light. It's not the opposite of light. It's not a contrary substance. It's just the absence within which light reveals itself. So that is a further way of understanding the contrast between light and darkness. But there are other perspectives also. And this brings us to the recognition that, yes, light is apparency. That's a fundamental premise for Sohrawardi. that light is what shows itself. It is zuhur. It is manifest. You don't need to prove it or define it because it's right there showing itself. That's a fundamental axiom of the Hikmat al-Ishraq. However, aren't there various modes of apparency or degrees of apparency or varieties of apparency? So consider this, that in the daytime, the whole sky is lit up by the sun, and the stars are invisible. But when the sun goes down, the stars appear. So the darkness of night provides another kind of apparency, the apparency within which the stars can be shown. Of course, just as the sun overwhelms the stars, the electric lights of our cities dims them too. One sees them much more vividly out deep in the desert, and our ancestors saw them with tremendous vividness. So we're aware that light, it has a revealing quality, but it also can conceal subtler lights. A glaring light can conceal subtler lights. And it's for this reason that hermits and yogis and Sufis, anchorites down the ages in many lands have withdrawn themselves into caves, monastic cells, chilakanas, secluded, dark places. The pre-Socratic Greek philosophers used to practice incubation in caves, going in a dark place, lying down, staying awake and watching, going into the darkness. Yogis and Sufis practice methods that involve closing the senses, sometimes with the fingers, closing the ears, closing the eyes, turning within, going into the darkness. Chilakanas, places where 40-day retreats are done, are often underground, almost like a tomb, a narrow, dark place underground, and you stay there in the darkness for 40 days. Carl Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imaging figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. For Jung, sun is associated with our conscious mind. But in the darkness, you discover the unconscious, that which you have pushed down, declined to see, declined to identify with. It's part of your conditioning. It's part of your experience, but you haven't claimed it. It's not conscious. It's not part of this persona that you've constructed. It's down in the depths. How much is there down in the depths? Yes, the subconscious, that is to say, that which we haven't been able to reconcile with our identity, but how much more the experiences of our souls prior to our conception, the alluring perceptions of subtler organs of our being on multiple planes of existence. There's a whole universe within us that is beneath the surface of the conscious diurnal mind. And we touch upon some of that vast material in sleep. And it's darkness that allows us to enter into sleep. It's the shadow of the earth falling over us that draws us into our own shadow, that draws us into our own depths, that takes us into that inwardness, initiates us into the mysteries unknown by the daytime mind. There are perceptions that can't quite withstand the glare of noonday sun. But the mystics have retreated into the darkness, even though it's fearful, it's frightening to go into the unknown and meet there with that which we haven't reckoned with or haven't accepted. So there is a hesitation, a reluctance, which explains perhaps why so few people seriously embark on the spiritual path. It's easier to glide along on the surface. Often it's a wound or a catastrophe or some tremendous disjuncture in one's life that propels one within. A wound is actually something that reveals what's inside and impels you to look. So there's a hesitancy, but sooner or later we're all drawn into the depths, whether intentionally or otherwise. And those who have delved into the darkness, yes, they had to confront the bugbears, the specters that haunt the recesses of the psyche. But beyond those apparitions, there are vistas of discovery, which are profound and sacred to the utmost. The sacred character of night reflects itself in such great spiritual masterpieces as St. John of the Cross's Dark Night of the Soul and Edward Young's Night Thoughts and Novalis's Hymns to the Night. Profound mystical appreciations of the treasures found in the darkness. Some mystics speak of the midnight sun, the discovery of a sun underground or in the depth or in the night, a black sun. The Babylonians called Saturn the sun of the night, and Saturn is, as you know, the most distant of the visible planets. It represents the far reaches, represents what is transcendent. Saturn has often been conceived as maleficent, well, malefic. Maleficent is a movie, I think. Malefic. A malefic influence that is unfortunate, but what those who profoundly contemplate Saturn discover is that Saturn is both haunting and profoundly illuminating in its own strange way. And this is the mystery of melancholy. Melancholy. Today we speak of depression. The ancients spoke of melancholy. Now, depression can be debilitating. It can be truly a burden to bear. But in melancholy is a call from the depths. And depression carries within it a longing of the soul, a desire to go deep. And Saturn, of course, nowadays Pluto is the farthest planet that we know through observation with high-powered telescopes. And so Pluto even more profoundly expresses this. But Saturn, classically, Saturn expresses the sense of distance from the sun, darkness, solitude, and yet a solitude which is ultimately the path that all seekers of the one must finally take, to be alone with the alone. Saturn is concentrated, alone, focused, apart from all distraction, waiting in the darkness. And that is the very inner essence of our dependence upon the ultimate, experienced in its raw, simple, primal form. So, light and darkness signify good and evil. They signify existence and non-existence. They signify the apparent and the hidden. Saturn is the hidden, darkness is the hidden. But most importantly, they symbolize all of this at once. They symbolize polarity and the coincidentia oppositorum, the juxtaposition of opposites, the harmony of night and day, of the in-breath and the out-breath, of birth and death, the autumn and the spring. Just think, we thrive in the intersection of opposites, and an extreme of any kind is fatal to us. So we bask happily in the sunlight, but too much sun can dry us up, can shrivel us up. Then we seek the shade of a cool tree. And that tree is drinking in photons, transforming light into food, and it's sending down a shadow over the earth. We can find ease in that shadow, and in that shadow, water is preserved, water that in a desert, a leafless desert, would fast evaporate and leave the land barren. But the trees, in casting shadows, contain water. So we can appreciate how shade and water are gifts of the trees and plants as they drink in the sunlight. The opposites commingle in the life of the plant to produce that green, vital, life-giving atmosphere in which we all thrive. Likewise, the divine self-revelation, the divine being's self-disclosure, which is the real imperative for the sake of which everything exists, that the divine being should be known. I was a hidden treasure and I longed to be known, and so created the world that I might be known. For this to happen, there must be opposites. There must be contraries. Therefore, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, God has 70,000 veils of light and darkness. If he removed them, the brilliance of his face would burn up all that met his look. 70,000 veils, not just veils of light, not just veils of darkness, stratified light and darkness. In this way, the divine face is both concealed and revealed. That's the mystery of the veil. The veil is gauzy. It doesn't only conceal, but it doesn't only reveal. If it only revealed, we would all be burned alive. We would disintegrate in the intensity of that vision. So it's as a mercy to us, and it's the preservation of the world, that light and darkness interlace. The desatir, the inspirations that have come down through the Alam al-Mithal from the ancient Persian prophets, says, Mazdam is hid by excess of light. The light of lights, in its sheer luminosity, is so glaringly bright, it's hidden. You can't see it. You can't look into the sun, your eyes will burn. But the filtration of the divine light through these 70,000 veils makes seeing possible. And therefore, God is known as a Sattar, the veiler, the one who veils.